Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the virtual event, Transforming Food Systems and Combating Climate Change, post-COP26 and beyond. I'm Talam, Chairman of Webit Foundation and Goodwill Ambassador for Digital Affairs of my home country, Bulgaria. As you have seen during the UN Food Systems Summit, we are having this gathering fully virtual. And today, with more than 5,000 registered participants joining from over 176 or 9 countries, and the numbers are growing from all around the world. Such is the world we are operating in. We are kind of combining the virtual and the real, a reminder that the COVID-19 pandemic is still with us. And so we resort to digital technology to bring us all together to discuss issues that matter to all of us. As your digital host, I will assist in connecting those who are participating virtually, all of you, to the main discussion and help bringing the different segments of the event. Speaking of which, I would like to mention to our dear audience today that you all can use the chat box features of the TDS virtual platform to share your comments and ask questions to any of our guest speakers. At some point in the event, we will pull out a few of these comments and questions so that our discussants can react and respond. Now, without further ado, let me turn you over to Dr. David Navarro, Senior Advisor to the UNFSS Special Envoy, who will be this event's moderator. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Rusev, and thank you, Plamen. And so everybody, good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us so much. We are operating in circumstances that are so very different from what was occurring 2 years ago. The current pandemic really has made our lives so much changed and has underscored the fragility of so much of our existence. And a manifestation of that fragility is the way in which food systems are working today. If food systems can be transformed, then it's possible to see an extraordinary impact on climate, on nature, on the environment, on human well-being, on the status of women, the involvement of young people, and indeed on every aspect of human existence. Getting food systems right is the key to achieving the Sustainable Development Agenda. And getting food systems right is absolutely critical as part of the difficult journey to secure a 1.5-degree future within our collective grasp. The world leaders and stakeholders who gathered together in the last 2 weeks in Glasgow to secure global net zero are just beginning to understand the importance of work on food systems within climate action. And that's why we're gathered together here today, to discuss the highlights and to highlight the nexus that brings together food systems and climate. We'd like to try to build with you on the outcomes of the UN Food Systems Summit and of COP26, and to look into next year's COP27. Our event is divided into 3 parts. The first part is a feedback on the key outcomes of COP26. The second part is a panel discussion. And the third part will be for a reflection from stakeholders and champions who actively participated in both COP26 and the Food Systems Summit. We were going to hear from Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the Special Envoy for the Food Systems Summit. Due to circumstances entirely beyond her control, I'm afraid that Dr. Kalibata cannot be with us right now. She's asked us to go ahead, and she sent us some messages that she would like to be woven into the discussion. And I'm very pleased indeed to be able to do that as your moderator. And so our first and really important speaker is somebody who I've known for some years. He's the former Chief Executive Officer of the extraordinary organization We Mean Business. And actually he's also a graduate of the Schumacher College, which is where the best of holistic studies are learned. But perhaps most importantly, this is the United Kingdom's high-level climate action champion, Nigel Topping. And Nigel is going to provide us with an overview of the key outcomes of COP26, give us some highlights to reflect on, and then hopefully help us to think forward to how food could perhaps be even more integrated into the climate action process. Nigel, lovely to see you. You're looking great. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, David, and I'd just like to say thank you to Agnes for pulling us together. I'm sorry she can't join us, but it's really nice to. I mean, it's very soon after Glasgow. I still feel like I'm recovering, right? But it's actually a good time to take stock, right, while it's still fresh, and we can look forward to. It's great to join you and many other Food System Summit champions. I think so. Just a few sort of thoughts about COP26 in general, then I'll try and reflect a bit on food and the way forward. I mean, just sort of opening comment is that I think last year seemed to work well to really bring food and nature, which of course are integrally intertwined, much more into the conversation about climate than they've ever been before. A long way to go still, but I think that's an important step forward because they're nexus issues, right? They're about, of course, about food, about disease, about gender issues, about poverty, about water, and about climate. So I think that in many ways, food and nature have been overshadowed by an emphasis more on the technological, on the bits of the climate puzzle which are amenable to technology breakthrough, like power and transport, where relatively speaking, they're silver bullet solutions, whereas this very complex food system that we're all grappling with is much more intersectional, and also including with the 3 Rio summits, right? I mean, we can't look at climate, desertification, and biodiversity in 3 silos when it comes to the food and ag system. And as you know, David, what we've been trying to do as the high-level champions with Gonzalo Munoz, who very usefully for me is a farmer, right? He's actually so he's got experience of the soil in a way that I haven't. Is to bring the non-state actor leadership not into the legal negotiations, but into the realm of the COP to try and really drive ambition and action forward, particularly short-term action, in terms of working to keep 1.5 alive, really bringing resilience up the agenda. And David, something you've helped me with over the years is to really make sure that that's very much seen as the human agenda, the lives and livelihoods agenda, not just technology and money, but actually this is really all about billions of people who are already being affected and crucially mobilizing finance. And you could wrap those 3 pillars of the Paris Agreement up under the heading of systems transformation, really, which is what we're all trying to do. So if I think about, let me just try and reflect on what Glasgow did achieve. I mean, one thing I think was clear, that there was always 2 loud poles of voices. One saying nothing's working, it's a complete disaster, and another one saying we've got this, there's fantastic momentum. And I think that the truth is that both of those have some truth. I mean, we know that the trajectory we're on is disastrous. Emissions are still rising. So when hundreds of thousands of people take to the street and say this process isn't working, there's a validity in that, and their skepticism is justified. On the other hand, we have seen the curve bent further towards 1.5 in the nationally determined contributions. I mean, you'll see all the analysis saying that between 1.8 and 2.4 is where we're headed now, depending on how many of the commitments are met. But that's only really adding up the national commitments. And what we've seen in Glasgow is, I think, real evidence of this systemic transformation where we've had, yes, national governments, but also investors, banks, cities, states and regions, and the whole value chain in many, many sectors all converging on the same short-term commitments for real economy transformation. And that role of the broader society has really been recognised in the overall agreement at the end of the COP. But there's also much more science and urgency in the COP decision than ever before. And I think that putting science at the heart means that this COP has actually agreed that we're aiming for 1.5 now, not under 2, and has agreed that we have to, they say 45%, we stretch that to 50% by 2030, and that there'll be a much more frequent ratchet now. So there's much more dynamism in the agreement. And one thing I'd urge everyone to do is don't just look at the Glasgow Climate Pact in isolation, but look at it as part of the movie since before Paris. If you look at it just as a snapshot, then you will see lots of flaws. But if you look at it as a movie, then you see the direction of travel and momentum that's really building. And of course, the real emphasis now is on implementing the actions that have been committed in the short term. But encouragingly, there's more and more evidence that actions are being implemented at the same time as ratcheting. So there was many examples of that on coal, on green hydrogen, on green steel, on shipping, on green steel, on the built environment. More and more cities, companies, investors all committing to the short-term action necessary. So a lot of systemic collaboration there. In terms of food, I think it's a mixed bag. I think there's some really good news in terms of very big systemic commitments to ending and reversing deforestation, not just one actor, but the whole value chain, and 133 countries and 33 financial institutions with $9 trillion. I mean, there's a sense of deja vu because we've had big commitments about forests before, but I don't think we've had so much systemic commitment. We've now got nearly 30% of the major food companies committed to science-based targets. And we've got alignment around things like methane, which was also a big overlap with agriculture. I think that the work to be done, though, is to bring a lot of the pragmatism of the solutions which are identified in the Food Systems Summit much more into the centre. I think we need a lot more advocacy to get food systems transformation. And I know there's been a lot of commitment from a lot of countries, but to get that embedded in nationally determined contributions and adaptation plans, like next year as part of the ratchet before COP27. We do need to have the standards from like Science-Based Targets Initiative for forest, land, and agriculture, so that the companies and the investors can really measure and hold accountable all the companies in those value chains, and that then the finance actors themselves can be held accountable. I think Egypt is a really interesting next host in two reasons. One, in terms of all of the non-state actor work, we made a commitment in the 5-year plan, which was submitted to the parties in Glasgow, which has been welcomed, to do much more to regionalise the work. Not just to have global pathways, but to have regional pathways. And I think Africa is obviously where a lot of the biggest challenges are in terms of sustainable food systems and the biggest transformation. I think we saw some really encouraging things in terms of a massive global energy alliance looking at energy access, particularly in Africa. Big pledges on land restoration, which is obviously very closely linked to the agricultural ecosystem. And then this big pledge from the UAE and USA on $4 billion on farming adaptation. So I think, and in early indications are that Egypt will be keen to really be very Pan-African, and will be really focused on nature, resilience, and finance. And the thing which is at the heart of those three is the food system. So I think that's a really good opportunity. I think we may want to, for example, think about having a food and ag day at the COP, just to really elevate it in the way that we've been able to elevate things like resilience and water at this COP. So I think good progress, but a lot to be done, and a chance to really start the year early by trying to set some of those agenda items for COP27 with the Egyptian incoming presidency. And of course, I'm looking forward to finding out who the incoming Egyptian action champion will be, so I can start to work with them on this agenda as well. So just a few early thoughts, David, back to you.
Nigel, as always, thank you for your remarkable championship. Thank you also for your willingness to actually help us see where the work that we've all been involved in on food systems could actually plug into the process that you've identified. Thanks for stressing that food systems are fundamentally about people's lives and people's livelihoods and involve hundreds of millions of people all over the world, and therefore do need to be approached differently from some of the other aspects, certainly of the mitigation agenda in which you and colleagues have been so successfully involved. And thank you for showing us that there will be a willingness and a space moving forward to the next phase to actually find opportunities to work linking together the more technical aspects of emissions reduction, the human aspects of emissions reduction and adaptation, and then the finance that is so sorely needed everywhere to act, particularly finance for poor people in poor countries whose lives are already being turned completely upside down as a result of climate change. And what we've learned in the Food Summit, Nigel, is that farmers feel it first. And some say they feel it the worst too, given that there are so many farmers who, in the face of climate change, are either leaving their land or leaving this earth. And that is one of the saddest realities about what's happening right now in the ag and food space. It'll be great doing this together with you. And we've got a lovely panel, everybody. I just want to say 1 second to Plowman, our digital host. Plowman, was there anything you wanted to add before we go into the panel discussion?
As you've mentioned, Dr. Navarro, I believe that, first of all, thank you so much, Mr. Topping, for sharing the main outcome of COP26. And we all stay absolutely hopeful for all the discussions to turn into reality. David, there are so many amazing speakers coming up next. And I don't want to waste more time, but to bring the floor back to you for the amazing panel you're about to moderate.
Thank you. So here is our first panelist, Her Excellency, Dr. Yasmin Fouad, Minister of Environment of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Now, Yasmin may be having difficulty with getting online, so if I don't hear from you in now, there we go, I'm going to move to our next panelist, who is Mayor Mr. Tunç Soyer, who's from the Izmir Metropolitan Government in Turkey. I've had the privilege of hearing you before, Mayor, in the work on this Food System Summit. Welcome back, I can see you there. You have the floor now. It's quite short, this bit. We are asking you to make any remarks you want to make, and in particular to address some of the questions that we've asked speakers. We invite you to come in quite quickly related to the questions. So I'm just interested in any reflections you've got on COP26 and food systems, and also any thoughts you've got on how food systems could contribute to the climate process. So, Mayor, we look forward to hearing your perspective now.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Despite huge expectations, unfortunately, food systems did not receive the right level of attraction and attention at global climate action agenda. This is mainly due to the fact that a debate on food systems is strongly connected to a major systemic change and a climate emergency response. Luckily, local and regional governments once again demonstrated a strong leadership by announcing the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration. I was one of the 100+ city leaders signing it. Considering that Glasgow Climate Pact highlighted the urgent need for multi-level and cooperative action, the strong vision of sustainable food systems at the local level is the biggest opportunity to connect COP26 to food. Food connects all the dots from climate change, health, biodiversity to circular culture. You cannot be a climate neutral and at the same time disregard where the food comes from. We cannot change our demand for food, but we can redesign how it is produced, transported, and processed. Here, we have to be determined enough to alter the entire food and agriculture system. If designed well, agriculture can be a great mitigation and adaptation tool for climate crisis. Additionally, it can serve to combat poverty across rural and urban communities. The Izmir Agriculture Program we implement in our province is precisely designed for this objective. In order to restructure agriculture as a friend of climate instead of an enemy, we identified 2 entry points. First, we support small producers and their unions. Second, we encourage production of local varieties of seeds and animal breeds. Supporting short food supply chains that enhance small farmers and local varieties can also be a priority instrument for food systems to contribute to the UNFCCC process. Furthermore, multi-level governance mechanisms between local, regional, and national governments should play a key role. Emergency food planning, food waste, fighting malnutrition and hunger cannot be managed by local governments alone. Local governments need national governments, and national governments need local governments to achieve sustainable food systems change. These are the remarks I would like to share with you. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. I apologize for that possibly intrusive noise that you normally associate with waking up in the morning. I'm super worried, everybody, about how we'll be able to hear from each speaker. So just as a reminder, when 3 minutes are up, you'll hear that. And that's a signal, as you just did so beautifully, to bring your remarks to a close. But once again, listening to you, I'm so inspired by the way in which the urban context can be such a good place for connecting food producers to consumers in a way that takes account of the issues that you so beautifully identified. I believe now, everybody, we've got the good fortune of hearing from Her Excellency, Dr. Yasmin Fouad, Minister of Environment of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Dr. Fouad, if it's easy for you, I can see you now. I offer you 3 minutes to make some remarks, particularly about how food can be more centrally inside the COP process, and indeed what specific policy and entry points we might be looking for, especially in the interval between now and the next COP in your great country. Over to you, Dr. Fouad, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. David Navarro, and it's a pleasure to participate in this session. As you mentioned, food should be at the heart of the climate political and technical processes. Climate change, as much as its adverse impact is affecting all development process in any country without differentiating between developed and developing country, food is hit very hard. It's hit when we come to any kind of community, whether those are rich or poor communities, when it really affects the soil, the agricultural land, and thus threatens the food and become more of food security within the whole globe. From that perspective, Paris Agreement within its internal process has recognized the fundamental, I'm quoting the agreement, the fundamental priority of safeguarding food security and ending hunger, and the particular vulnerability of food production systems to the adverse impact of climate change. Also, when we come to see how Paris has articulated that adaptation and mitigation, you would find that Article 2, Para B, adaptation and mitigation actions have to be in a manner that does not threaten the food production. So even when we are making a fight against the impact of climate change, we need to make sure that this does not threaten the food production. From that perspective, we need to be innovative in the way we are placing food processes of the climate change. First of all, we need to make sure that there will be an adequate space to discuss the food systems, agriculture, sustainable land management, and biodiversity within the climate area. What we always have been thinking and seeing is only that food relates to agriculture. And this is where we start to talk about smart climate agriculture, or we talk about agriculture from the adaptation perspective. I see that we need to uplift that discussion to be more a holistic, comprehensive, and inclusive process where we are linking the food, the agriculture, sustainable land management, the biodiversity with the discussion of the climate. From that perspective, I do recall that during the CBD, the Conference of Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, President Sisi has called for a synergetic approach for linking back the loss of the biodiversity or the biodiversity, climate change, and land degradation together. And since then, there has been actually good progress between the Secretariat of the three. But we as parties and stakeholders to those conventions, I think we need to do that call and that push into that process. Now the Executive Secretary of the three Rio conventions are discussing together and seeing where are the synergies. And a big example of that, when we see COP26, we find that there was a big bulk discussing the nature-based solutions, for example. So this is where we would like to give more emphasis on the land and the agriculture. Secondly, how can we, what kind of policy or entry points to that process? I think that there are three important entry points that maybe we can look at in that regard. First of all, let us try to look further and link that to the post-2020 biodiversity framework, because it is there and the food is there. But we need to build upon that, because the next April, our dear colleagues from China, as the current president of the CBD COP15, will be finalizing the discussion on the post-2020 framework. Secondly, build on that throughout the COP27 and see how can we bring adaptation. It's a very important priority to the discussion of the food and how can the land be part of that discussion. So that will be the second milestone. The third one, if we come to see the outcomes from Glasgow, we have a very important outcome, which is the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program on the global goal on adaptation. If we were able to anchor the food security at the heart of that work program within the global goal of adaptation, then we will find that we have really made a good entry point that would follow by the means of implementation, which is the finance, capacity development, and technology transfer. Over to you, Dr. Nabarro.
Your Excellency, that was just great. I'll tell you why. Because you offered us, in a very generous way, your image, not only of why food and agriculture just has to be part of the whole COP27 process, but you also offered us some really nice clues on how food can come in, particularly in the adaptation area. I suppose the part that I will remember is you saying we have to lift it up and make sure there's space for these big issues to come together because they're interconnected. And you built on the work that was done on nature-based solutions during COP26. Thank you so much. And if you can stay with us, that'd be great, but we understand that you might be really busy.
Yeah, I'll stay for 10 minutes. I'd like to go.
Okay, shukran. Thank you very much indeed, Ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Nabarro.
Thank you very much. Let's now move to hear from Christelle Pratt. Now, Christelle Pratt is Assistant Secretary General for Environment and Climate Action in the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States. And I'd just like to say that Christelle has been super active in the whole preparation for the Food Systems Summit. So it's lovely to see you again. And I give you the floor now. Again, I ring at 3 minutes, and then I'd like you to start really stopping if you can, so everybody can speak. You have the floor now.
Thank you very much, David, and I hope that all that are present can hear me clearly.
Pretty good, pretty good. I suspect you're from somewhere a few miles away, so you're pretty good.
Yes. I couldn't agree more with the Honourable Minister who just spoke earlier with me, but I guess I just want to make a couple of points. And from a SIDS perspective, from small island developing states, and of course, within our membership, 38 of our 79 members, all developing countries, all vulnerable countries, are small island developing states. So what can we take away from COP26? Did it deliver for us? And we would offer that, in fact, the outcomes were modest. We wanted ambition, but it didn't really quite deliver as we would have expected. But I would like to maybe just shift us a little from land and agriculture to oceans and aquatic foods, because I do feel that within the work that we need to do to overhaul food systems, we need to consider both. We need to consider green food and blue food. And in fact, blue food offers many opportunities, including how we can mitigate and adapt to climate change and its threats. What we did find as well is that, of course, with SIDS, the pledges to meet the 100 billion climate finance target by 2020 was, I guess, sorely missed, if you like, but there still is a commitment that target will be reached. I think that one of the important things is how do we link some of that financing to adaptation and mitigation initiatives with respect to food systems transformation. One of the other points in terms of the Glasgow Climate Compact, I mean, we don't really see specific mention of food, but we do, and I think as the Honourable Minister said, see mentions of protecting biodiversity and ecosystem restoration. And so, again, thinking of things really in an holistic fashion is very important. There perhaps was one little win out of the compact on oceans, and paragraph 60 and 61 really does invite some relevant work programs and constituent bodies under the UNFCCC to consider how to integrate and strengthen ocean-based action in their existing mandates. And I think that's an important point to make, because there is a lot of work to do, but at least now oceans is being mentioned. And we've now got to try and ensure that there is a focus and that we're able to address how we look at oceans how we link that to food, how we link that to aquatic food, and ensure that it becomes part of the investment portfolio, if you like, as we start to look at adaptation as well as mitigation. In fact, David, I didn't really want to say much more than that, apart from we have so much work to do between now and COP27. There are quite a number of developed countries that need to be encouraged to really lower their emission cuts so that we do stay with the 1.5 degrees to stay alive. And I say this because it is so important for small island developing states who are at the front line and bear the brunt of climate change impacts, not in the future, but right now. So those were just a few things, but I think it's about connections and integration and how important overhauling food systems is going to be for us now and into the future. Thank you.
And thank you, Christelle. 1.5 to stay alive. And how profoundly and brilliantly so many small island developing states engaged in the planning for the Food Systems Summit in a really brilliant cross-sectoral, multi-stakeholder, in-depth way. Very much taking their cue from what you just said, Christelle. You know, it's all connected together. And I think that for us, at least, it was a real learning point for us. Don't split things apart, but bring them together. Climate, food, nature, and the well-being of people, including their nutrition and health, not to be separated. Now we go to another good friend who's been with us through the Food Systems Summit process. This is Peter Backer, the Chief Executive Officer of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Peter, I start my clock now.
Thank you, David. And thanks for calling us together so short after COP26. It's fantastic to see everybody. You look well recovered from the journey to Glasgow. I thought I normally leave COPs rather depressed, I have to say. But this time I left Glasgow with a spring in my heels. This was, in my opinion, the first how-to COP instead of the why or the what COP. The amount of people in the COP center bringing pledges, bringing action, bringing willingness to change. The fact that more CEOs were in Glasgow than ever before. The fact that Mark Carney with his 130 trillion, I believe it was what he mentioned, bringing the finance sector to the table is a real breakthrough. The fact that the IFRS has been able to launch the ISSB, the accounting rules for disclosure of climate and soon also nature issues. The fact that we, for the first time, have had a Nature Day are all signs that we realize that in order to fix climate, we need to transform systems. And there has been no better effort in this year 2021 than the UN Food Systems Summit to recognize that if we want to transform food, if we want to create an equitable, net zero, nature positive food system that can nourish all people with healthy diets, we need to transform systems. And that realization I saw really echo well in the rooms in Glasgow. Science is incredibly urgent. There were lots of really deep conversations, realization that hard to abate sector, the heavy industry, the energy system has to change. And leaders from those sectors were omnipresent. The first Nature Day bringing attention to forest and land use, pledges from the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate that were being launched, pledges by the UK government to do more on food and agriculture and trade. I've seen CEOs of some of the largest food companies for 5-6 consecutive days in the COP during COP27. And some of those were also already in July in the UN Food System pre-summit. So the attention, the fact that this is now high on the agenda is really established. What I do want to say is there's been a lot of attention for forest, for agricultural systems, for regenerative agriculture, but there's many things we still have not addressed. Food loss and waste, malnutrition, climate-related resilience in food systems. So when we had a dinner in Glasgow called the Friends of Food Dinner, we actually came to the conclusion, and I'm so happy Madam Minister is still here, that we need a food day in COP27. And I'm not here to just make speeches, Madam Minister, but if there's anything I can do to help you organize that, please reach out to us. We'll be very happy to support in any way we can. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for talking about your feelings about the COP. I love it, moving from the what and the why to the how. And I love your examples that you gave. I love you speaking.
I thought the minister wanted to come in.
Okay, Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Peter. This is very much what I sensed out of the COP26. Thank you, Peter, for giving that reflections to this session. I know it's on food systems, but I came out of this COP, and I've attended as much as COPs as I have been in the ministry. I was happy that we were able to finish the Paris rulebook. I was happy with that momentum, but the one thing that I thought would really be important, as much as there were those days of the Finance Day, the gender, the youth, and all those topics, is that there were those stakeholders in each venue talking about the topic, but we need to have something that mixed those together. You know, this was the private sector, the scientists, the youth, the gender, the women, and the NGOs. But did we ever think of redefining COPs that we would need to bring those stakeholders once again? I see that the food is the thing that would bring them together. If we talk about adaptation on agriculture, on water, if we're talking about the 1.5 and the energy sector and so forth, you are getting a segment. I know whether it's few or many, that's not the idea of the portion, but you're getting a segment that is interested in that. But food, I can see it as the thing that will bring all those together instead of discussing a thematic topic in isolated as private sector alone, NGOs alone. I think that we can do really something good on that part. Thank you, Peter, and definitely will reach out to you.
So, Minister, food is the great mixer, the great connector, the opportunity for looking at everything together. Peter, did you want to quickly react to Madam Minister?
No, I think she is completely right. This was the conversation in the Food System Summit. You cannot make a climate resilient food system without talking about agriculture, without dealing with food loss and waste, without changing people's diets. It's all interconnected, and indeed it will bring the whole value chain from the raw materials all the way to end products and waste of food together. And I thought the one thing that I did not like about the COP is that the people who were inside the COP had exactly the same desires as the 100,000 people outside protesting, but the trust between these two groups is extremely low. And it's really a good idea to connect people much more into one conversation than in all kind of separate conversations. So thank you for that.
Panelists, if you want to come into the conversation at any point, it's much better if we do talk openly. So don't hesitate to do what Madam Minister did and use the hand raise function. We can quickly move around, I think, and I want to just quickly thank the people from TVS for enabling us to have this flexibility. Now, the next in this panel is another person who's been working on these issues for some time, Helena Laurent. She's been involved in the food systems work with us and developing the food systems dialogues. She's been advancing these dialogues in lots of formats, but particularly with farmers, about which I'll say something in a minute. But meanwhile, Helena, it'd be lovely to hear from you, and over to you for your remarks.
Thank you so much, and lovely to be here. A privilege to have the opportunity on this panel and also to be able to reflect and take stock. right? So I'm here, have the honor to represent an organization which talks for it's the independent voice of the consumer in the marketplace. We're in 100 countries around the world via 200 organizations. And it was wonderful to hear from Christelle just then. One of my highlights of COP was listening to those who were negotiating for Fiji in Glasgow, speaking back with the Consumer Council of Fiji, from Fiji, talking about the need for blue food, the need for action, and the way in which they're working together, government and NGO, to push things forward, to help create the tipping point and to make sustainability easy for consumers. Now, it was a fantastic example of leadership, and one I think we can really develop around the world. So the thing about, you know, consumers coming into this, we've got a whole range of challenges, right? It's not just what we eat, it's how we travel, how we plug in, what we buy, how we heat and cool our homes, how we spend and save. And those things all need to come together. You know, there are so many people who are starting to make that change. We can reach a tipping point. We can make it easier for others and create that pathway if we are fast and fair and accountable and inclusive. So there's an opportunity there. The things that I think we see as very common, both across the Food Systems Summit and then through into COP, were essentially, let's raise awareness, let's really focus in on the communication of this to consumers, because the amount of investment in making things clear, having national dietary guidelines that take into account health and sustainability, that needs to be increased significantly. The focus on the supply chain, traceability and transparency, connecting consumers to farmers, not just because it's a nice thing to do, but because we can innovate and we can create marketplaces. And you can see many examples of that around the world. And then the focus on infrastructure to reduce food waste. So these were common things, and bringing those together makes total sense. You know, if there was one thing coming out of the many conversations we had with farmer advocates, and those were interesting conversations going into earlier this year, it's coherent policy. Both farmer advocates and consumer advocates are seeking coherent policy at national level that brings all of this together. And I suppose I'll finish with, you know, Nigel opened this by saying, with a movie analogy, we have to see COPs as a movie, as a sort of series of processes, which I agree. And I also came away from Glasgow feeling there's a potential for a beautiful story here, but we're in pre-production. We have the script, we maybe have the actors not necessarily talking to each other. We haven't started, and we need to get the cameras rolling. This doesn't just need to be the blockbuster. This is the story of our lives. I would love to see a food discussion in Egypt. I would also love to see a marketplace discussion. How can each of us, how do we make this easy? How do we make this work for every single person, so we have a fair, safe and sustainable marketplace for everyone? Thank you, David.
Thank you very much indeed, Helena, in particular for stressing just that it really is possible to link together consumers and farmers. You've been doing that in the Consumers Association with different farmer organizations in the last year as part of your engagement in the Food Systems Summit, and then stressing that actually the pieces are all in place, but now it all has to be brought together. We've got a few minutes left for this panel, and I want to invite panel members to come in for another round in which they talk a little bit about how you do what Helena asked for, which is to really make it happen in the meetings that are going to take place between now and COP27 in Egypt. Mayor Tunksoya, you are the first person. You come in, please, now.
Thank you again. It seems that next year there will be many opportunities to discuss food-related issues in Egypt, in China, in Cummings. But also I would like to invite you all to Terra Madre in September in Izmir. Terra Madre is the world's biggest food fair, but it will not only serve the food tasting, but also platforms to discuss food-related issues, food security, biodiversity, culture as well, and climate emergency. So it will be another opportunity to discuss the food-related issues in September in Izmir, in Terra Madre Food Fair. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Terra Madre, everybody. Terra Madre.
David, I have to leave. Thank you very much. Minister. I have to run to another meeting. Thank you very much, and we will meet you all once again during the COP27 with the food day in a food day. Thank you.
Brilliant. Please see us as members of your team. We are your team here to work for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and best of luck and stay safe, all of you. Bye.
Thank you. Does any other member of the panel wish to come in quickly on precision? Peter Backer, please, and then Christelle.
I think on the business side, the big push this year will be to create the reference scenarios for TCFD in the food system. The TCFD is going to be the governing framework for business. So far, scenarios for food system have not been built. We will be developing those. We will be rolling them out to business. And that will really be the way to hold companies accountable going forward on the actions they are plotting. So that's going to be our main push this year.
That's a pretty big piece of work, Peter. And very glad to hear that you and colleagues are going to move ahead on this as a basis.
From COP15 in Kunming, China, there are several other important meetings. In February, there will be the 7th Our Ocean Conference to be held in my part of the world, the Blue Pacific continent in Palau. There will also be the 2nd UN Ocean Conference, which is co-chaired by Portugal and Kenya, and that will be convened in Lisbon, likely to be in June next year. And I say this because one, of course, the UN Ocean Conference will deliver against SDG 14 and look at not just SDG 14, life below water, but also how it links to other development goals, including SDG 13 on climate. But it goes back to what we've all agreed, that we need to think about things in an interconnected way. And when we talk about farmers, we should also think about fishers. And when we talk about green food, we must think about blue food, because both green and blue is all about food and keeping us healthy and sustaining us, whether it be our well-being or our livelihoods. Thank you.
Christelle, thank you very much indeed. Really brilliant work being done to raise the profile of the ocean, reminding us that the 7.8 billion people in our world all depend on the good functioning of the ocean. And grateful to you for bringing that up. We were going to be joined for this panel by Vijay Talam, who is Executive Vice Chairman of the Farmers Empowerment Corporation of the state of Andhra Pradesh in India. And I just wanted to tell you that Vijay can't join us because he's tangled up in some stuff he just has to attend. But he's been very kind and he's written down his main thoughts. And I'm just going to read to you two or three of his sentences. And he asked me to do this. The first is that food systems have a critical role. They account for 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions, but they can play a huge role in being part of the solution. And it's time that this is recognized. Farmers, part of the solution. Fishers, part of the solution. Food systems, part of the solution. Number 2, Food producers are the major victims of climate change. Ironically, they're sometimes seen to be contributing to climate change. Just make sure they're in the middle of the action. Number 3, in future COPs, there should be specific national commitments on reducing greenhouse gas emissions as a result of activities in food systems. Number 4, farmers who transition to nature positive systems and successfully sequester carbon and also perform other useful services for restoring ecosystems should be paid handsomely for their contributions. Handsomely. So that's Vijay really making the point. Farmers are very much part of the solution. Fishers are part of the solution. Livestock keepers, part of the solution. Forest dwellers, part of the solution. Count them in. Helena, if you wanted to say any remark before we close the panel, particularly on perhaps what you and others can do to help make certain that food systems are there in this way that we've all discussed in the next COP, please do so now.
Absolutely. So I know we're hearing from Marie-Claire later on, but one of the things I want us all to remember is, we signed a statement a youth statement about the importance of putting food into the climate debate. And, if I listen to our next generation network of young leaders, they will say, you used to say it's about safety and quality. Those things equal health, sustainability and fairness now. So we really need to think about that, sort of what are we preparing for the next generation? Very pragmatically, consumer advocates tend to be very pragmatic and practical. So we will be looking at, how are we giving the right information about choice to consumers? How are we giving that awareness about the ways that we can be responsible consumers in the marketplace? We'll be talking to businesses and governments locally in each of the 100 countries around the world about the things that we think can create that tipping point and make it easy for consumers. And we'd be delighted to bring that collective voice together towards Egypt, where I would say that voice is still missing, and that connection with the others, as the minister pointed out, is what we can make this sing. Thank you, David.
Brilliant, lovely. We're super grateful to all of this panel for giving us a real insight as to what are the possibilities for really getting food, agriculture, fisheries, livestock, forests, again, much more into the middle of the discussions in the next COP, much more inside the nationally determined contribution statements from countries. Everybody, please join me in thanking Nigel Topping, the UK climate champion. Please also join me in thanking Her Excellency Yasmin Fouad, Minister of Environment of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Mayor Mr. Tunç Soyer, Izmir Municipal Metropolitan Government of Turkey, Assistant Secretary General, Environment and Climate Action of the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, Peter Backer, Chief Executive Officer, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Helena Laurent, Director General, Consumers International, and Vijay Kumar Talam, Executive Vice Chairman of the Farmers Empowerment Corporation of Andhra Pradesh. Really, you have given us some really excellent. Another part of the program, and we go back to Dr. Planam Rusev. We're going to hear from some of the comments that have come in through the wider connections that we've got. And then after that, we will hear from some stakeholders who are going to comment on what they've heard so far and give their perspectives. Plamen, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Navarro, and thank you all for panelists for the insightful conversation. While you were discussing, our audience has been active in the chat box and has been asking questions. Now, if you allow me, I would like to share some of the questions with you, and hopefully you will be reflecting on some of them. I will start with a question coming from Mr. or Miss Bangjo. What can be the role of government subsidies to encourage better behavior of food ecosystem participants? And I would like to add one more, because there are so many questions here. One more question, which could somehow be related. This one comes from, just 1 second, trying to find it, from Lorenza Giacchia, if I'm reading the name correctly. Do you think it is realistic to expect further discussions in the future on the importance of encouraging plant-based diets and ending subsidies for dairy and meat as part of the emission reduction strategies, including as regards methane emissions? So maybe David, you can lead us in this discussion and direct the questions to the right participants.
Thank you very much indeed. Plamen, colleagues, if you were able to follow the questions, it'd be very, very good to get your reactions. Christelle, I can see you. Helena, I can see you. I can't actually see our other speakers from the panel. So I wonder, Christelle, whether you would like to comment first, and then Helena, and I might bring in some of the people who we've got coming for the next panel, if they've got comments they would like to bring in. Christelle first, please.
Apologies, David, but I was just really going to thank you for the invitation. I do need to leave for a meeting, and I'm over time already, but not to necessarily answer. I know Helena will do a brilliant job at answering the questions. I think she and I resonate quite strongly on many things. So I'll leave it to you, Helena, and thank you. Lovely to see you, David. You've done a great job and you continue to do so. Goodbye, everybody.
Great. Everybody, Christelle has almost single-handedly pushed this important issue of blue foods forward, and we are super, super grateful. Helena, please.
Lord, I feel a weight of responsibility on my shoulders. So David, you do need to bring in other experts, because I won't be able to answer all of them. I think the second question is absolutely realistic. The plant-based diet and the meat, what is a good diet is an incredibly important question. And we're going to see, we need that to be one at the heart of this. We need technology to help us make sure that we can get sufficient nutrients from plant-based diets. We need to make sure that people understand, what that looks like, so that the nutrition elements of this, as well as the sustainability side of it, are well communicated, that people have access to that it's affordable. I see that as a really important question, and entirely doable, but of course very difficult to think through in terms of livelihoods and the balance of where production is. So we do need to answer that. On methane emissions, if you look at some of the country commitments and the big pledges on methane, I believe they did not include reference, or they did not sufficiently include agriculture. It was more of an energy oriented pledge. So there, let's take that as an opportunity if we can, and push further. In terms of, I see perhaps Christina is there and some others are nodding and may have points to add on that. David, if you want to head to them. Government subsidies, of course, this is a key not to unravel, so that we're subsidizing and supporting the right direction, which is not the case right now.
Thank you very much indeed, Helena. Everybody, we're going to show the style of working that has characterized how we've been right throughout this summit. We've been joined by three experts, extraordinary people. Dorit Adler, who's the president of the Israeli Forum for Sustainable Nutrition. Also by Maria Cristina Tirado, who's a senior policy lead in the World Food Programme as part of Action Track 5 in the Food Systems Summit. And Carla Caballeros, who's the executive director of the Guatemala Chamber of Agriculture. I mean, you heard Dorrit, Christina, and Carla, I hope, that Plamen was telling us that there were questions coming in about methane, about subsidies and the repurposing of subsidies, and also about plant-based diets in the wider scheme of things. These are super interesting, sometimes controversial issues. And so really quickly, because I don't want to take up time for the later inputs that you're going to make, just love to get any quick reactions you might have to what Plamen invited you to think about. Dorrit first. But I hate to say this to you, Dorrit, but there's a little thing, there's a mute button that you have to unmute somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk in such a crucial meeting. There are many questions, what is a healthy diet? However, when you look at the evidence-based, which is big data, today there is hardly question that the healthy basic diet is also sustainable, and it is mostly based on healthy plant-based foods, which are not created by technology, but by farmers. They are the ones who really produce our healthy, sustainable food. And what I feel is that today it's very, very popular to put a lot of money and maybe big hope that the industry of the alternative proteins and alternative foods will solve the big epidemics of obesity, diabetes, nutrition insecurity, and the climate crisis. And I call everyone here, we know that today we can already act to change the food systems in a way that will make a huge change in the health and our climate crisis. And I prepare some suggestions for all of us. Thank you.
Well, Dorrit, as I've known you always, ever since I first heard you speak, you talk this incredible clarity and you say it can be done. The farmers have the capacity, just tune into the farmers, tune into the fishers. They've got the knowledge, they've got the know-how.
However, we need to support them, of course. We need the subsidized will go to the right places. Today, the broken food systems are not by chance led us to the point we are. And I think with brave decisions, position statements, we can lead huge change. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So that's it. So a farmer or a fisher or a livestock keeper or a forest dweller has this ability, this know-how, but they need support, they need protection. Sometimes it's quite risky doing this. Is that right, Dorrit? It's the risk that you're worried about.
It's the risk, and of course, they need also the knowledge. We need today, we know that farmers and agriculture is big part of the climate crisis on one hand, and they will be part of the solutions. However, we need to support them to grow the basic food, the basic healthy and sustainable food basket, and not to act on foods mostly as commodity, which is today the case.
Yeah. So everybody, just because of the way in which the conversation's going, Maria Cristina, if you don't mind, can I ask you just to hold for a couple of minutes while I go straight to Carla, because Carla, I remember from my last encounter with you, you are right into the role of agriculture in innovation, the role of agriculture in creating the kind of dietary patterns that are so important for the future. If that's right, Carla, could you please expand on what you heard from Dorrit? You have to unmute, otherwise I think we can't hear you. I can't hear you. There.
Thank you, David. I cannot agree more with both of you regarding the importance of agriculture and farmers, and not only because they have the capacity, they have the knowledge, as you already said, but also because there are great examples across the region and in the country, in Guatemala, of companies or businesses and farmers that are already doing these big investments in innovation to adapt to climate change. Regarding the outcomes of the COP26, I would like to highlight probably the recognition of damage and loss, which is key for nutrition and food security. The increase in the adaptation fund, which I believe opens a lot of opportunities for farmers, and probably two of the main declarations, the Forest and Land Use Declaration, from which Guatemala is a part of, and the Because of the Ocean Declaration, which is also so related to farming and agriculture and aqua. Coalitions that were launched during COP26, such as the Aim for Climate, the Agricultural Innovation Mission, which I think brings, David, just what you just said, a lot of great opportunities for farmers, for countries, for public-private sector collaborations in order to create better access for farming regarding developing of crop new varieties to adapt to climate change, using more ocean irrigation, and its own carbon sequestration techniques, and many other areas that farming can contribute to achieve the mechanisms and instruments that are part of the Paris Agreement.
Brilliant, thank you. So, I mean, Carla, you are again wonderfully consistent. As you've always said, farmers have so many solutions to offer, and we thank you for that. And now, my very, very, very good. I just want to acknowledge that Pierre Tam is here, and Pierre, I see you're sorting your phone, but I now go to Maria Cristina Tirado. Maria Cristina, if you want to, I'd love it if you could comment on what came through from the audience that Plamen gave us just now. Also, you may have broader comments on the COP26 process. You've been so involved in resilience, and I was particularly interested to hear Carla mention loss and damage and the adaptation fund. I suspect you've got some views on those as well. Maria Cristina, you have the floor.
Thank you, David, for the invitation. Thank you, Oliver. This is an excellent and relevant event, and it has been great to hear that most of the speakers are so fine-tuned. That is, this is very rewarding. So what we wanted to share a little bit that the effective adaptation options that have been shown to have highest feasibility and highest feasibility and effectiveness. These are very simple, and they are looking into innovation, social innovation, change of narratives, and integration. So this is something that I wanted to add to what has been done by has been covered by Carla. Like, for example, everything that is related to nutrition sensitive and climate resilient agroecological food production. If it is nutrition sensitive, will have much more effectiveness. Or issues like integrating this with access to sustainable, affordable, healthy diets, or nutrition-sensitive social protection. But this has to be integrated in plans that have early warning systems, risk reduction, risk transfers, insurance, microinsurance. And it's critical that we think about some of the enablers that we were discussing during the UN Food System Summit. All the implementation aspects that are enabled by, for example, empowerment of girls and women, enhancing in education for all, right-based approaches for governance and social cohesion includes peace building, are highly relevant enablers that are going to be critical for the effectiveness and feasibility of adaptation options. So, for example, we have done in collaboration with the group of resilience of Action Track 5 of the UN Food System Summit, a preliminary analysis of what were the results of the new national determined contributions. And we were surprised of seeing certain outcomes at this point. For example, agriculture was included in almost 80% of the NDCs, right? However, integrating resilience in agriculture was only considered by 37% of the national determined contributions that we were looking at. Same thing in relation to solutions that can bring nutritional or food security outcomes. Only 27% of the countries that have been referring to agriculture and food systems, they have included or considered nutrition as an outcome. Even least developed countries that are affected by severe nutritional problems, which are aggravated by the impacts of climate change, they were not having more than 26% of consideration to this. Now, linking with what has been said in relation to the diets, it is surprising that seeing the co-benefits of healthy diets, and in spite of the opportunities for meeting the 1.5 climate goals, and all these co-benefits of dietary shifts, from overconsumption of animal products and sustainable procurement, to the date, only 3% of the national determined contributions have been exploring agriculture demand-side mitigation options. And these changes in the dietary patterns that have, in view of a less greenhouse-intensive dietary patterns of food procurement, are very critical. However, we cannot just complain. We have to find solutions. And in this specific aspect, we need to provide guidelines for the calculation of greenhouse gas inventories for diets, because the agriculture guidelines, they don't include the diets. So we could work always in a proactive way. So finally, just to reply what you mentioned about loss and damage, I mean, it has been a complete going backwards and changing from a facility to just a dialogue, the aspects of loss and damage. And in this context, we are seeing that climate resilient development pathways that combine at the same time urgent matters of mitigation with adaptation, and that are addressing urgent food security and nutrition needs, and that are building individual, household, and ecosystem resilience, that are linking with ambitious mitigation policies to minimize food systems' impacts to climate change, and at the same time, to access to local affordable, healthy diets are critical components to achieve SDG 1, 2, 3, 13, and to ensure resilient food systems for all beyond 2030. So I will leave it here, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot. We got brilliant input there from Maria Cristina Tirado, really stressing that the resilience dimension is just not strong enough. And thank you very much for bringing out that point at the end and making such a lot of useful connections. And now we go to the chef Pierre Thiam, who comes from Yolele Foods. Pierre, we're making short comments on COP26. It's you coming now, and then after you comes Marie-Claire Gruff, and I need to give a little bit of space to Dorrit Adler and also to Carla Caballeros, because I didn't give them much just now. So we're doing sort of 2-minute moments. You have it now, Pierre. Thanks for joining us. You're so welcome. You have the floor. If you could just find the unmute thing on your phone and give it a little press, that would be good.
There we go. There we go. I appreciate it. Thank you, David. So yes, my name is Pierre Thiam, and like you said, I'm a chef from Senegal. So I'm from a region that's very much affected by issues of climate change. When you talk about Senegal, we're in the Sahel region, south of the Sahara. That's like a desert that's ever expanding. And as a chef, I've also identified, being from Senegal and being located in the US, you know, where my restaurants are, I've always had a mission to introduce my food culture, and that's doing that organically. The concept of looking to introduce ingredients that are underutilized came to me gradually over the years. And writing cookbooks, I realized that I needed to add ingredients to bring ingredients to the markets first, so that my clients or my readers would be able to have access to those ingredients themselves. And the way to do it really is to open a chain of supply for certain ingredients that are considered underutilized right now. And those ingredients, not only they are resilient, which gets me to the point that Marie-Christina was bringing earlier, that we don't insist enough on resiliency, but one ingredient in particular caught my attention, and I became a champion of it. It's called fonio. It's an ancient grain that grows in poor soil in that Sahel region, south of the Sahara, where nothing grows, but it thrives in there because it has deep roots that regenerates the soil. You know, it grows in 2 to 3 months. It's very, very nutritious. And the most amazing part as a chef for me is that it cooks in 5 minutes. So it was the perfect Trojan horse to introduce in a new market. So my vision with Yolele was to bring crops like fonio and turn them into global crops. And those small companies like mine, Yolele, and any SMEs, we are doing this job. You know, when you go on the ground, you see companies like ours who are bringing models of developments by working with small farming communities and introducing crops that are resilient like fonio, because not only they are the future for food security, if I said that already, but in addition to that, they are really the type of crops that are going to really make a difference in those rural communities in Africa, for instance, because those communities are among the poorest in the world. So we're offering not only economic opportunities for those regions that are completely depleted of any opportunities, but in addition, we really are slowing the advance of the desert, which is a really important aspect. So we're doing so by bringing crops that have been around for 5,000 years, very, very resilient, like I mentioned earlier. So this is what our companies are doing, but we don't really have access to the means that an organization like this climate summit that just happened could bring to us. So we need access to those means to be able to do that. We have shown how to open markets for those crops, and in doing so, saving biodiversity, but we cannot do it without a whole higher support from companies, big organizations, Fortune 500s, who could be using even 1% of their products, adding 1% of sustainable crops like fonio in their products would growing fonio. So that's the mission of Yolele, and in doing so, just a mission to bring African food to the forefront. In doing so, we are saving biodiversity, and we are really helping companies meeting their sustainable development goals. So that's what I was going to say.
Eh bien, Pierre, merci beaucoup.
Merci, David.
Vous faites. Vraiment, c'est exceptionnel. Thank you, Pierre, for just showing what it means. You create markets for these crops that are hardy and resistant, and then it's easier for the farmers to grow them. Simple. And as he says, Pierre,
You're welcome.
a bit of help. You need a bit of help to do it. Thank you very much indeed. Now, if you look up Marie-Claire Graff on the internet, you find somebody who has accomplished an enormous amount in her life. And then you look at one other feature and it says, actually, she's really very young. And she's actually a key member of the UNFCCC. And it is called the Youth, just lost the actual title here, the Focal Point for the Global North UNFCCC Youth Constituency, with the acronym of YOUNGO. I've actually got to know Marie-Claire Graff because of her work in a number of Swiss organizations. I'm super impressed. It's a real privilege to have you here. And you were in Glasgow. Your moment now. Sorry, it's not very long, about 2.5 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you so much, David. And yes, there are a lot of titles, but I do actually not like the title. I'm a climate justice activist trying to bring the food system into the climate debates. And yes, indeed, I just returned yesterday night from the COP26 in Glasgow, and nature was expected to be heavily featured at the summit. It was one of the taglines you might have heard about, like coal, cars, cash, and trees. Yet I was actually very disappointed that the food system, despite this growing recognition and despite the food system summit, was not more prominently featured at the climate summit. While we have been seeing some tiny progress in the negotiations, So this is one part of the climate summit. Especially, I think what made me really happy is that for the very first time, agroecology was included in one of the draft texts. It's still bracketed. It's not yet agreed. It will go into COP27 next year. We saw that there was quite some pledges, quite some announcement. It's probably also what you have heard, because it's very more attractive to talk about all these bigger announcements than talking about the nitty-gritty details of the negotiations. For everyone who has been at the climate conference, it's not really attractive to talk about this. But so we saw that there was quite some pledges around it. Maybe one was the methane pledge you have been seeing, and as everyone knows in the food system space, methane is one of the major contributors when we talk about food system. Yet the pledge is heavily focused about fossil fuels and not really about livestock, not really about agriculture. So again, there, if we have the right direction, we see that actually the food system is not really at the center. The same, there was another pledge, and I can't actually remember the name. I think it's Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Land Use and Forest. As well, there is a tiny reference to food, but it's not really at the center. And I think this is one of the biggest issues that we have building this momentum, but we couldn't yet bring it directly into the negotiations. We have it somehow mentioned in some of the pledges, but it's really hard to hold leaders accountable to these pledges, as most of them, and we have been seeing pledges. David has been seeing more pledges than I saw in my life, and many of you as well, that it's very hard to actually follow up and hold leaders accountable to this. So I really hope that we can build more momentum, and not waiting for COP27, because it is going to be too long, but we need very strong language in the draft text, in the agreed text, and also, as mentioned before, really resulting then into the national determined contributions, and really have them in the national agreed laws where we can also hold leaders accountable. And also want to just say thank you to all, especially the young people who have been lobbying so intensively at the COP26 for the recognition of food systems. There are a lot of people from the food systems movement, from the food systems summit, real food systems people who have been working very hard days and night to bring it to the attention. And yet I think we made a step in the right direction, but we are very far, because only with a food system transformation we can really keep 1.5 alive.
Hey, can I just say something to you, you absolute superstar? The real thing is, don't stop just because the COP is finished. It's so urgent. Keep the process going. And if the negotiators have gone home to their capitals, at least get all the young people who are so active on this, that you've been leading with others, keep it going. It matters so much. Dorrit, come in for a last 30 seconds.
30 seconds?
Yeah, because we're run out of time.
I wrote a few things which I think are quite transformative. Of course, the next COP should focus on food systems. I would say it is up to us to act now. There are processes that, if implemented as policies, can turn to be game changers in food systems globally. A basic, healthy, sustainable, culturally adapted food basket is the basis for all nutrition security budgets and programs will impact many of the SDGs targets. Today, huge public and donation budgets, tens of billions, feed the obesity, diabetes, nutrition insecurity, and climate crisis endemia. A UN position statement setting the compass for countries to establish policies that nutrition security programs will be based on a healthy, sustainable food basket, and what it cannot include can have a global influence from procurement to human resilience. I have some more, but I would say like this. Lastly, the next scope, will be in Egypt, which is our neighboring country, and we share a hotspot area together. Establishing a regional champions net to lead food system dialogues and prepare regional game changer suggestions to transform the food system to healthy, resilient, and just on the basis of collaboration will be inspiring, in addition to contribute to real change in the next COP. I'll be glad to be part of any such step. Thank you.
Well, Dorrit, you are just brilliant. We met in Madrid, I remember, and you said, I'm there for the long haul. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Carla, I didn't give you much time at the beginning. Just give us another 30 seconds now, because what you do in Guatemala and in Central America is so important. But please unmute.
The three opportunities to keep it going, as you said. First, to keep being part of the table, not only for the discussions, but for implementation. Continue being part of the public-private discussions. We are part of the National Climate Change Committee in Guatemala. Second, keep it going for advocacy, for innovation and infrastructure, for resilience and adaptation. And third is to promote and recognize, because that's the way to scale up good business practices that are there for scaling up, that are there to support the adaptations and to transfer technology to small farmers. 3 examples that I can give you in Guatemala: the circular economy a strategy from the sugar of the energy grid of the country, out of waste of the sugar cane. Second, all of the app and tools that are being developed by the National Coffee Association to support their small farmers in soil management and weather forecasting. And third, the zero deforestation strategy of the oil palm industry, which is being monitored by a satellite. So there are a lot of things that, and a lot of investments are already doing, and there is a lot of opportunities to scale up that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Everybody, remember, work on food starts local, builds up, builds up, builds up, goes national, goes regional, goes global. It is so much based on local action. And that's why it's so much fun. That's why you often cannot compute the enormous value of what's being done on food, but that's why the community that you've heard today are really, really keen to bring food systems into the climate COP process. Dr. Plowman, we've had a lovely time here with panels and then second panel and then so on. Is there anything you'd like to say to end our session? I'm sorry we've overrun, but thank you for your patience and giving us the extra 5 minutes. Over to you.
Dr. Navarro, it's been actually a pleasure, and in my role as digital host, I will, with your permission and the permission of all participants, I will allow myself to extend this event by a few minutes more by addressing the fact that we had a phenomenal number of comments and questions from the amazing audience of over 5,000 people from almost every single country around the world. So it's been a real pleasure to listen to this insightful discussion, and thanks to your wonderful moderation. I would like to reflect. There are so many questions. We will make sure that the amazing team behind the United Nations Food Systems Summit shall further address those questions and comments to the respective parties for their awareness and reflection. But there was a very good comment from Neriman on the conference, on the coherence between global processes such as the Food Systems Summit and the COP26. It is exactly, I heard several speakers in COP26 sessions complaining about the food matter not being discussed. It had already been discussed during the year at the UNFSS pre-summit and summit. So we see the delegates and stakeholders of the different summits need more exchange of information. Indeed, isn't it? And with your kind request for a very few words at the end, if you allow me, I would like to wrap up what I've been listening very carefully during this otherwise really very insightful event. Now, first, we need to uplift the discussion of food systems, biodiversity, and climate, said Madam Minister from Egypt, the country hosting COP27. This is great news to have Food Day at COP27, hopefully. Bring climate, food, nature, nutrition all together, not to discuss and have them separate, which speaks to the complexity of addressing issues systematically. Balancing food systems availability for feeding the population, reducing prices, supporting small farmers, fishermen, and fighting climate change is the goal altogether. And clear statement that no climate resilience discussions will be fruitful and accurate without the food systems being involved, because it is about 1.5 billion people to stay alive. Those were few of the notes I took during this event. And let me share my very personal opinion, David, that you, Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who we miss so much today, as well as many of the panelists today, are such a great examples of visionary leadership and commitment to saving people's lives. Back to you, David.
Wow, thank you very much indeed. Well, this has been a complex production all over the world, virtual studios, many people involved, lots of panelists, wonderful interpreters, many participants, a fabulous guy, not very far behind the scenes, Oliver Oliveros. I don't know where you are, but I would really like to thank you for all that you've done to make this possible, plus others in the Secretariat of the Food Systems Summit, together with colleagues from the COP26 organizing team, together with Plamen and Elena and colleagues from TVS. So that's a giant all-round basket. Thank you to everybody. Particular thank you to Noemi, who is here supporting me and as always is making things work smoothly. To our panelists, to our second panelist, to Nigel Topping, to Agnes, who couldn't be with us today, thinking of you, and to all the team, just thank you, goodbye, but it's not forever. We're going to continue working on bringing food systems into climate and making certain that it's a really virtuous and positive and reinforcing relationship. With that, bye-bye. See you soon. Lovely.
Feeding billions of people is putting tremendous pressure on the planet. The emissions, biodiversity loss, and deforestation caused by our food systems are a major part of the problem. But together, we can change that. The UN Food Systems Summit is working towards a world in which our food systems protect and restore nature rather than tear it down. So, how do we get there? We worked with thousands of people from across the globe to identify promising solutions backed by evidence that have the power to transform. Now, it's time to act.
We can incentivize sustainable agriculture by giving people the financial tools they need to do their work in ways that benefit the environment.
We can develop a system that sets environmental standards to govern food trade.
We can restore native plants along riverbanks around the world, reducing soil erosion and shielding water systems from farm runoff.
We can innovate sustainable production solutions for nutritious aquatic foods. The diverse animals, plants, and microorganisms harvested from and grown in water that are essential to healthy diets.
We can encourage a more sustainable livestock sector, which has a great potential to protect animal health, capture carbon, and improve the fertility of our soils.
We can promote an inclusive model of conservation led by indigenous people who can share their ancestral knowledge of food systems.
We can increase agricultural biodiversity by adopting production models that support people, the planet, and economic prosperity.
We can implement new climate-smart innovations and techniques that improve the nutritional value and resilience of crops.
We can develop an enhanced monitoring system to track progress in land restoration and to help build the business case for further investments.
We have a long way to go, but these solutions and others like them have the power to deliver the future we want, a future where our food systems protect and restore our planet.